Hello everyone, welcome to the 8th session on GEA. This session is about Kant's moral philosophy. In discussing Kant's moral philosophy, we shall pay attention on his idea about duty, autonomous will, and categorical imperative. Now, as an overview, we have already discussed the virtue theories of Aristotle and Plato. We have also discussed Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill's consequentialist theory. Now, for this session, we shall focus on duty theory or deontology, that of Immanuel Kant. Now, who is Immanuel Kant? He was a German philosopher during the Enlightenment era of the late 18th century. He was born on April 22, 1724 in Königsberg, Prussia, which is now Kaliningrad, Russia. He was the fourth of 9 children born to Johann Georg Kant, a harness maker, and Anna Regina Kant. Later in his life, Immanuel changed the spelling of his name to Kant, letter K, to adhere to German spelling practices. In 1740, Kant enrolled at the University of Königsberg as a theology student, but he was soon attracted to mathematics and physics. In 1746, his father died, and he was forced to leave the university to help his family. For a decade, he worked as a private tutor for the wealthy. During this time, he published several papers dealing with scientific questions exploring the middle ground between rationalism and empiricism. In 1755, Immanuel Kant returned to the University of Königsberg to continue his education. That same year, he received his doctorate of philosophy, and for the next 15 years, he worked as a lecturer and tutor and wrote major works on philosophy. In 1770, he became a full professor at the University of Königsberg, teaching metaphysics and logic. Now, these are some of the major works of Immanuel Kant. Namely, he wrote groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, critique of pure reason, critique of practical reason, critique of judgment, the metaphysics of morals, lectures on philosophical theology, religion within the limits of reason alone, and perpetual peace, a philosophical essay. Kant focused on ethics, the philosophical study of moral actions, and he proposed a moral law called the categorical imperative. Later on, we shall elaborate what this categorical imperative is all about. But basically, categorical imperative states that morality is derived from rationality, and all moral judgments are rationally supported. Meaning to say, just by being rational, or man being a rational being, this obliges him to become moral. And for Immanuel Kant, what is right, and what is wrong, and there is no gray area. And human beings are obligated to follow this imperative unconditionally if they are to claim to be moral. And Kant continued to write on philosophy until shortly before his death. And in his last years, he became embittered due to his loss of memory. And he died in 1804 at the age of 80. Now for this session, we shall focus on Kant's groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, because in this book, he laid down the foundation of his moral philosophy. Alright, let's start with the idea that moral laws must be universal. Kant believes that moral laws should be universal laws. This means that what is true in one part of the world, in the Philippines for instance, should be true to other parts of the world like America or Korea or Japan or wherever. Kant believes that there should be one standard universal moral law to which everyone is obliged to obey. And this moral law, which is universal, must be grounded on pure reason. I mentioned a while ago that man being rational is enough reason for man to be moral. That means to say that since man is a rational being, or man is endowed with rationality, we have the power or the faculty to think. Now that is enough reason for man to be obliged to act morally. And to the question, why do we have reason? Kant stated that it is not to ensure our happiness. We need reason in order to have a good will. Now, the will is the faculty that we exercise when we act. The will enables us to choose to do or not to do something. The will enables us to choose one course of action over the other. If you or your girlfriend are pregnant, if you are pregnant and that is an unwanted pregnancy, you can choose to have that organism aborted or not. And that is the function of the will. This is the faculty that we use every time we do or not do something. Now what about goodwill? A goodwill is one that always acts in accordance with the moral law. The goodwill, again, is one that always acts in accordance with the moral law. A goodwill has a clear value in itself, regardless of the circumstances. That's why it is said that the goodwill is good in itself. If you have the goodwill, or if your actions are always based or in accordance with the moral law, then your actions are always moral, because the goodwill is the kind of will that guides us to act morally. And if you have the goodwill, you are assured to be a moral person. In fact, Kant said that a goodwill isn't good because of what it affects or accomplishes. It's good in itself. Goodwill is good in itself. It has a value on its own. Now, even if by utmost effort the goodwill accomplishes nothing, it would still shine like a jewel for its own sake as something which has its full value in itself. So, Kant emphasizes so much on the idea of goodwill. Now, what is the goodwill again? The goodwill is a kind of will that chooses to perform an action that is always in accordance with the moral law. So what is Kant's concept of morality? For Immanuel Kant, moral worth, or the moral worth of an action, depends on motive. Now what is motive? It is similar to intention. For Immanuel Kant, an action obtains moral worth if it is based on good motive. Now what is the motive or intention of an action for an action to obtain a moral worth? The answer to the question is when we act based on a sense of duty. The intended or actual effects of actions cannot give moral worth to the actions. By saying this, Immanuel Kant is showing his contradiction or opposition with consequentialism. Because as you can recall, Bentham's and Mill's consequentialism judges the moral worth of an action based on its ability to produce good consequences than bad. And here is Kant saying that the moral worth of an action cannot be based on actual effects of actions. Meaning to say, you don't have to figure out what the consequences would be. What you need to think of to act morally is to think of an action that should be done based on the sense of duty. He said, when an action is performed from a sense of duty, that gives it moral worth. For example, if you believe that being honest is your duty, that means to say, no matter what the circumstances are, you have to be honest. Whether you are not comfortable to tell the truth, or you are not comfortable to be honest, or even if you will get hurt in the process of being honest, but since you perceive honesty as your duty, then you are bound morally to perform that particular action. That being said, Kant disregards the consequences of actions because he focused on the idea that an action has or obtains its moral worth if we act based on duty. Respect for the law is needed so that the law can command us. And we need reason in order to be able to represent the law in itself and therefore to be commanded by it. The law that we are saying here does not necessarily point out to the laws of the government or laws which are external to the human being. But the laws we are referring here are the laws that we ourselves determine to be followed. Meaning to say, when we perform a particular duty because we perceive something as a law, meaning to say, if honesty is a law, then we have to act based on it. Now this honesty perceived as a law, based on Kant's philosophy, the law here is not and should not be created by something or someone external to the human being, but rather it is the human being alone who is endowed with reason or rationality, who should formulate these laws. Because once we identify a particular act as a law, then we are bound to obey it, or we are bound to perform it, because it is the human reason that identifies something to be a law. Okay. Let's take, for instance, the case of the shopkeeper. This case is about a shopkeeper who has a customer who buys in his store, and that shopkeeper happens to have a customer who is not numerate, or who doesn't know the exact amount or the right amount that is given to him as a change of what he purchased from the store of the shopkeeper. Now, if you are that shopkeeper and you have all the possibility, and you have all the chance to shortchange your customer, meaning to say, if a customer buys you a product amounting to 100 and he gives you a 500 peso bill, and so that customer of yours is entitled for a 400 change. But in the situation, the customer is not numerate, or he doesn't know about mathematics. So if you give him 200 or 100, he wouldn't know that you are shortchanging him, or he wouldn't know that you are not giving him the right change. So the question is, in this case, the shopkeeper gives the right change, which is 400, based on the 500 peso bill that the customer gives, and he bought a product amounting to 100. But the question is, in this case, the shopkeeper gives the right amount of change to the customer, even if he has all the chance to cheat. But his reason of giving the exact amount of change to the customer is he doesn't want to be known by others that he doesn't give the right change. Now let's focus on that motive. The shopkeeper gives the exact amount to the customer because he doesn't want other people to know that he is not giving right or exact change to his customers. Now, from Kant's point of view, is that motive morally right? Giving the right change to the customer because he doesn't want other people to know that he is not honest, or he doesn't want people to know that he is not giving the exact amount, or he doesn't want his reputation to be tarnished. Is that motive morally good? For Immanuel Kant, such motive is not morally good. Why? Because the shopkeeper is focusing on the consequence of him not giving the exact change. The shopkeeper is focusing on the bad consequence that would result if he doesn't give the right change to the customer. For Kant, such intention is not good because if the shopkeeper will give the wrong amount of change without tarnishing or without destroying his reputation, then the shopkeeper would do so. Right? So for Immanuel Kant, we do a particular action because it is our duty to do so, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the consequences, regardless of the effects, regardless of the result. We do a particular action because it is our duty to do so. And this duty to give the right change or the right amount to the customer is perceived as a duty because it is imposed as a law, not by anyone else outside the person, but it is imposed by us. It is imposed by the human person himself. Right. Let's take a look at this, another example. This is a true story of a true story published in New York Times on June 9, 1983. We were not born yet. The headline of the newspaper says, "Miss Speller is a spelling bee hero." Now in this news, it was said that 85 of 137 contestants were eliminated today at the opening of the National Spelling Bee, including a tearful child who told the judges that they had misunderstood him, that he had actually misspelled echolalia. The name of the child was Andrew Flossdorf, 13 years old, of Fonda, New York, in Montgomery County, went to the judges at an afternoon break and told them that although they thought he had misspelled the word correctly, he had mistakenly substituted E for the first A. So the child admitted that the judges misunderstood or misheard his spelling of the word echolalia, because instead of saying that the first letter is E, the child actually substituted E with A. And so he admitted that he actually misspelled the word. The judges said, "I had a lot of integrity," said the boy, adding that part of his motive was, "I didn't want to feel like a slime." Now what is a slime? It means immorally repulsive or odious person, or a person deserving of hatred for doing something bad. So the boy told the truth to the judges because his motive was he didn't want to feel like a slime. He didn't want people, when they would know that he actually misspelled the word, he doesn't want people to know that he did not tell the truth. And since he did not tell the truth, his act is morally repulsive, or it deserves hatred. Now, let's try to analyze the boy's motive based on Kantian perspective. The boy told the truth to the judges based on the motive that he didn't want to feel like Islam. He didn't want to feel guilty for having actually misspelled the word, when the judges actually believed or perceived that he did spell the word correctly. Now, from the Kantian point of view, or from the ordinary point of view, we may perceive that the child's act is moral because he told the truth. He became honest to himself. But from the Kantian point of view, the child's act of being truthful is not based on right motive, because his motive of telling the truth is his feeling not to feel like a slime, or he doesn't want to feel guilty for not having told the truth. Now, this is not morally right, or this is not morally sound as a motive, because from the Kantian point of view, if being dishonest or being untruthful does not give you a guilt feeling, then you would continue to do something bad. Right? But Kant is saying that when we do something good, it should be based on the reason that doing good is your duty. Not because you feel good or not because you feel bad when you don't do so, but because it is based on your sense of duty. That telling the truth or being honest is a duty, even if doing otherwise will give you a guilt feeling. Right? Okay, so let's move on to this idea. For the will to be absolutely good, the law that determines it must not make reference to the expected effects of actions. Once again, this statement shows Kant's opposition to Bentham's and Mill's consequentialist theory, which means that an action becomes moral not because of the effects, or not because of the result that it produces or will probably produce. This means that I should act only in such a way that I can will that my maxim should become a universal law. So what is the kind of law that we are talking here, that I was talking a while ago? Now, the universal law, or the law that we are talking here, is actually the universal law. Now, what is this universal law? The universal law is opposed to maxim. Maxim is a personal guiding principle. It is a principle that guides your particular action. However, not all maxims can be treated as a universal law. Meaning to say, if the maxim of your action is this, and if everyone in the world will follow that maxim, and the world will become chaotic or the world will become dangerous, then that maxim is not a universal law. Since it is not a universal law, it is not therefore a moral law. For example, telling a lie. If you tell a lie, if you try to convince someone that he should let you borrow money because you are in need of money, and you told a lie that you are going to pay him or her the following week, although you know that you can't really pay the money the following week, but still you made a promise to that person in order to convince the person to lend you the money. And so you are actually telling a lie. And so the maxim of your action, which is to borrow money from another person based on your promise that you are going to pay him or her the following week, the maxim there is, you want to borrow money, yet you tell a lie in order to convince the person to let you borrow money. Now, if everyone in the world will tell a lie, or if everyone in the world will make a false promise, then you too will become a victim of the false promise of others. And so, the world will then become dangerous if everyone tells a false promise and everyone becomes a victim of false promises. And so, lying as a maxim is not a universal law. Since lying is not a universal law, meaning to say it cannot be done by anyone without causing harm. And so lying, since it is not a universal law, it is therefore not a moral law. So we will only be protected from losing our grasp of duty if we are convinced that reason commands us to act from a sense of duty. So this is what I was telling a while ago, that we perform a particular moral action because it is a duty. And this sense of duty is not commanded, it is not dictated by anyone else, but rather it is dictated or it is commanded by you yourself. It is not your mother, not your father, not your teacher, not your church leader, not the government who tells you to do something good, but it is you yourself. Why? Because we are endowed with reason. We are endowed with rationality. We are endowed with the power to choose what is right for ourselves and for everyone in the world. And so the duty that we are talking here is not external to the person, but rather when we do something good out from duty, it's because we are fulfilling the law that we ourselves have set in us. We cannot derive morality from examples. We need to set the standard first in order to be able to determine whether the examples do show morality. So Kant doesn't want to look at what are the examples of good actions, but rather Kant analyzes the standard or the principle in which actions becomes moral, and we judge our examples, we analyze, we evaluate our examples based on the standard that we have set. And the standard that Kant set for an action to be moral is the universality of the action. Meaning to say, if everyone will follow this, or if everyone will do this, and the world will prosper, the world will be a better place to live in for everyone, then such act is moral. If not, then such act is not moral. Now let's move on to Kant's categorical imperative, because this categorical imperative is his ultimate moral standard. And we will discuss categorical imperative in opposition with hypothetical imperative. Now, what makes categorical imperative good and what makes hypothetical imperative not good? Acting based on categorical imperative is an unconditional command, while hypothetical imperative is a conditional command. As an unconditional command, categorical imperative, when a person is guided by categorical imperative, he does something good, not because he expects a reward, or he expects praises, or he expects recognition from people, but rather he does something good for the sake of doing so. Do X for the sake of X. You tell the truth for the sake of telling the truth. You help people for the sake of helping them. Not because you want to be popular, not because you want to be praised. but rather you do good for the sake of doing good. While hypothetical imperative as a conditional command, you do X if you wish to achieve Y. Now, some political candidates during election campaign would do something good. They would donate something to charity, to charitable institutions. They would give stuffs to people so that people will remember them, and so that people will vote for them, so that that candidate will win a seat in the government. And so, such act of the political candidates during political campaigns in which they do something good is a conditional command. They do good because they want to win the votes of the people. Categorical imperative is also a priori, meaning to say it is based on reason. If you can still remember a while ago, we started with the idea that man is endowed with reason, and just by that mere fact that man is endowed with reason is enough to expect man to behave morally. Because we are beings with reason, we are beings endowed with rationality, that's enough to expect man to behave morally. That's why categorical imperative is a priori, or it is through reason, while hypothetical imperative is a posteriori, meaning to say it is based on desires or inclinations. You do good because you donate something to people who are in need because you feel happy. You feel happy by doing so. And so it's based on desires and inclinations. But categorical imperative is through reason, and reason imposes a law. Reason imposes moral actions as juries. And categorical imperative is universal and absolute, meaning to say it is a universal law, while hypothetical imperative is relative, or it's dependent or contingent. And lastly, categorical imperative is deontological, duty for duty's sake. This is what we were saying a while ago. While hypothetical imperative is consequential in nature. The end justifies the means. We do this because it causes happiness for the greatest number. That's the philosophy of Bentham and Mill. While categorical imperative is based on duty and doing good based on duty for duty's sake. Hence, it is deontological, from the word deon, which means duty. Right. Some years ago, I wrote this article entitled Moral Culture in Kant's On Education, Implications and Antithesis. And in this article, I elaborated on Kant's concept of obedience. For Kant, there are two kinds of obedience, namely absolute and voluntary. For example, the government says that we have to pay our taxes. If you pay your tax because you are forced by the government to do so, then you are following absolute obedience. Why? Because absolute obedience is a result of compulsion by a command. Na pugsan ra ka. Kaya kung if we don't pay our taxes, the government will penalize us. And so, bisag dili ka ganahan unta mo bayad og tax, ni bayad ka, tungod kay napugos ka. Right, so that's an example of absolute obedience. But at the end of the day, nisunod dragod gyapon ka, you still pay your tax. The second kind of obedience is what Kant calls as voluntary obedience. Now, voluntary obedience is the result of confidence by a reasonable will. They pay ka og tax because You believe that the tax that you pay to the government will go a long way. It will help people, it will help poor people who need services from the government. And you believe that paying tax is a duty, and you are not forced by the government to do so. Or even if you are forced by the government, but personally you saw the importance of paying taxes, and so you pay your tax because you see the reason to do so. And for Immanuel Kant, obviously, voluntary obedience is better than absolute obedience. For example, last week, some parts of Luzon was devastated by Typhoon Ulysses and other previous typhoons. And these are common sites in which there is a flood, a high level of flood that forces people to evacuate. And we know the situation in evacuation centers. Life is not comfortable there. And we know that people affected by typhoons need water, they need food, they need clothes, among others. So the question, if you think of giving donations to these people, why do you think you would donate? Is it because you are forced to do so? Perhaps ang inyong simbahan ninyo na dapat mo-donate, kwarta or in kind. Or naluoy ka nila, mo nang ni-donate ka. Or you think that donating is your duty. Regardless kung ang inyong simbahan or ang inyong mga leaders sa inyong society or community na dapat ka mo-donate. Or regardless kung naluoy ka or wala. But if you believe that donating is your duty, then that gives donating its moral worth. Dili tungod kay naluoy ta kay kung if we don't feel pity to these people, then we will not think of offering donations. Or kung dili sa tapugson by anyone, then we will not think of offering donations. But if we look at these people's circumstances and reason will tell us that we have to donate because it is our duty to help others. And so that act of donating because you believe that it is your duty, you think it's your duty, then that gives your act its moral worth. It's never enough that you feel pity, because pity is an example of feelings, and feelings are not good grounds for moral actions to have moral worth. What gives actions their moral worth is the sense of duty. Right. So the only thing to which our maxim should conform is the universality of the law. So there is only one categorical imperative. What is that? That we should act only according to a maxim that we can will should become a universal law. So going back to this, if you donate to these people because you believe it's your duty, and all people in the world will do so, then we are making the maxim as a universal law. When everyone perceives or thinks that it's our duty to help people, then we are converting a maxim to a universal law. And if we imagine a world where everyone helps each other, then we can imagine a world which is selfless, a world that is not selfish, a world that is beautiful to live in. Here are examples of maxims that cannot be universalized, or maxims that cannot be elevated into a universal law. One is suicide. When do we commit suicide? We commit suicide, people commit suicide when they feel sad, when they feel that they can no longer solve the problem. If mo-suicide ako sa katawan, then mag-suicide kang tanan. Because the concept of categorical imperative is if a maxim can be universalized, or if a maxim can become a universal law, then that maxim is moral. Now, what will happen to the world if we all commit suicide? The tendency is the world will no longer be inhabited by human beings. The world will be left with no single person, and no one will take care of the world. And we know that that scenario is not good. Or borrowing money while making a false promise to repay. This is the example I gave a while ago. It's not also good to borrow money based on false promise to pay. Another is not developing one's talents. Okay? That is an example of a maxim that is not, or that cannot become a universal law. The reverse of not developing one's talents, therefore, it is our duty to develop our talents. And if every person in the world will develop his or her talents, then we expect a world wherein people are experts, or people are good at what they are good at. And the fourth example is a kind of the four examples, only the fourth example can be treated as a categorical imperative, because this is a maxim that can be elevated into a universal law, and that is contributing to the happiness of others would further their ends, which must be my ends too, if the conception of an end in itself is to have its full effect in me. That we should care for the welfare of others. That we should not only think of our own happiness, but rather we should also think or contribute to the happiness of others. And if everyone will do this, I will contribute to the happiness of others, and others will contribute to my happiness, then it will create a world where everyone is happy. And another concept that Kant emphasized in his book is that the idea about kingdom of ends. This kingdom of ends explains that each person has a dignity. Each person has an inner worth. Each person has a value that we need to respect, that we have to consider the welfare, the dignity, the value, and the worth of each person. That we are all members of this kingdom, and in every person has a dignity, and we have to respect that. That we cannot use people simply as instruments for our own welfare. Dili pwede nato gamiton ang ubang tao para sa atuang kaugalingon nga kapakanan, because that will violate the kingdom of ends. The idea that each person has a dignity, each person has a value. Dili pwede nga pagbulagan ta uyab atong gamiton ang ubang tao bilang panakigbutas, because in that way you are using the person merely as an instrument to your own selfish desire. We have to know that ang kanang tao nga imong gigamit as panikigbutas, he or she also has a dignity. He has a worth and he has a value. Na dili na to pwede gamiton as an object or as an instrument to our selfish ends. It is part of the dignity of a rational being to obey only laws which it at the same time enacts itself. So here are the formulations of the categorical imperative. First formulation is the universal law formulation. It says, only act on a maxim that you can will should become a universal law. And we have explained that already. The second is the humanity formulation. Treat all rational beings as ends in themselves. We have also explained this, that each person has a dignity. And the third formulation is always regard yourself as a legislator for a kingdom of ends. This formulation gives the complete determination of all maxims. One's own legislation should harmonize with a possible kingdom of ends, a totality or completeness of a system of ends. That every person is capable of legislating a law for himself, and that law should harmonize with the laws that other persons are legislating to themselves. Of the three formulations, the first formulation is the most rigorous one and the best guide to moral judgment. But all three formulations can help in gaining acceptance for the moral law. Again, of the three formulations, the universal law formulation is the most rigorous one, the best guide to moral judgment. How do we judge the morality of an action? We judge it based on its ability to be universalized. If it can be universalized, meaning to say if it can be followed by everyone without causing harm or danger, then it's moral. If it cannot be universalized, meaning to say it causes danger and harm and pain to others, then it's not moral. Lastly, we discuss Kant's three contrasts. That morality, first, it's based on motive. As far as motive is concerned, there can be two, namely duty and inclination. Nibuhat kag usa ka butang na maayo, first, because it's your duty. Second, it's your inclination, naganahan ka. Nitabang ka, first, because it's your duty. Secondly, because you are inclined, naganahan ka to do it. Second is morality is based on freedom, determination of will. And as far as determination of will is concerned, there are also two, autonomous versus heteronomous. Autonomous explains that the individual person is the one who creates the moral law for himself, while heteronomous is the moral law is dictated by something or someone external or extrinsic to the person. And as far as reason is concerned, there can be two imperatives, categorical versus hypothetical. And to summarize everything, we learn that Kant's moral philosophy bases the motive of an action not on inclination, but not based on inclination or feeling or desire, but rather on duty. And the will should be autonomous, that no one forces us to do good, but rather it's the person himself or herself who chooses to do good, or it is his own will that chooses to do good. Lastly, the imperative should be categorical, not hypothetical. For your assessment, there are three assessments actually here. The first assessment is to answer 8 items as true or false. So, number 1 to 8. Assessment number 12 is multiple choice. 1 to 10. And assessment 13 is essay. Number 3 items. Number 1, what does Kant mean when he said moral laws must be universal? Moral worth of an action depends on motive, and when an action is performed from a sense of duty, it gives it moral worth. Substantiate your answer by citing real-life examples. I want you to explain these 3 statements using your own words. Second, what is an imperative in Kant's philosophy? What is the difference between hypothetical and categorical imperatives? Into which category does Kant thinks moral demands fall, and why? Last, in what way does Kant's moral philosophy, which is deontology, differ from Bentham's and Mill's moral philosophy, which is consequentialism? Submit assessment number 11, 12, and 13 outputs to my personal messenger account. This ends the 8th session in G8 about Kant's moral philosophy. See you in our next session. Keep safe and stay healthy, everyone.